Diarmait Máel na Mór. Many historians assume he was born around 1003, as his father, most likely killed with infighting within the family, had died around 1006. His father, a very violent man, was involved in many clan wars throughout Leinster. Most of this fighting was fighting over the kingship of Leinster itself. Máel na Mór, which was his father's nickname, may mean bald cattle. Many historians debate what this true meaning is. However, one dominant theory is that it had links to do with his Marauder past, his father's Marauder's past, going around stealing cattle, murdering and looting the lands around him. And losing his father at such a young age had a real detrimental effect on Diarmait and his brother Domnall the Fat. Diarmait and his brother Domnall the Fat grew up in a very violent era. They grew up in the period of the Battle of Clontarf that happened in 1014. Furthermore, the Battle of Clontarf itself was a violent affair that had violent men from all over Western Europe. I'm talking about Iceland, Norway, Ireland, England and Scotland. All these war bands came together and they fought just outside the walls of Dublin. Diarmait himself would have been on top of the walls watching this bloodfest. This battle, the Battle of Clontarf, was seen as one of the most heroic battles in all of Western Europe at the time. The Battle of Clontarf, 1014, it would be echoed through all the halls of Europe, but in reality it was disturbing, disgusting, bloody and violent. Men in shield walls clashing against each other, trying to hold the line so the other side wouldn't get flanked and murdered, killed. Their brothers in the line next to them, their best friends being hacked to death in front of each other, stabbed and killed. While Diarmait watched all this up on top of the walls of Dublin, seeing grown men crying and bleeding. It's no surprise with so much violence going on in Diarmait and his brother's life that he would grow up with a very warped point of view of the world. In fact, by the time he reappears in the annals again in 1032, he's going around doing exactly what his father was doing before him, marauding the countryside, stealing cattle, burning churches, burning settlements, killing, stealing women. The man is evil and he doesn't care. And it's no surprise with the background given to him. This is also the later age of the Vikings. Allegedly, the myth is that the Viking age would die in 1066, but we all know in reality that the Vikings never go away, they just settle down. Regardless, my point is, this is the age of Vikings. Vikings would go around marauding and attacking, and this isn't Celts versus Vikings. Diarmait himself would hang around and ally himself with Vikings all the time to go on sprees of murder and violence throughout Leinster. Around 1036, Diarmait went off and kidnapped Rory or Tig. He then forced him down in a hut with two other men. He then got a poker, a hot one, and shoved it into the eyes of Rory, blinding him. This disqualified him as kingship and head of the clan. Diarmait made himself head of the branch of that clan. Thereon, Diarmait wanted to make a name for himself, a real name for himself. So he went off and did what many would see as the impossible. He sieged and plundered Waterford. Waterford at the time wasn't small or insignificant. In fact, he was the small and insignificant one of a clan that was way off in the east south of Ireland. Waterford at the time was one of the biggest trade ports in Western Europe, and here was Diarmait coming into the spot and attacking them completely out of the blue, catching them off guard and plundering the city. Diarmait had really made a name for himself, and not in a good way. In fact, the King of Ireland at the time, Donnchad O'Brien, wasn't too impressed. He wasn't too impressed with this new massive marauder kicking about the countryside of Leinster, and Donnchad wanted to shut him down. Diarmait Máel na Mór. His mother was from modern-day Kilkenny, but at the time it was called the Kingdom of Osraige, which had its own king. Diarmait Máel na Mór was good friends with the King of Osraige, and the King of Osraige really didn't like the King of Munster. Donnchada O'Brien. So Diarmait mac Máel na Mór and the King of Osraige went off and started attacking both his rivals in Leinster and the King of Leinster, and also they went on trying to attack the King of Munster. However, this would severely backfire when they went around raiding, burning churches, so on and so forth, because they would bump bang on to the main army of Munster, and the main army of Munster wouldn't give mercy that day, and poor Diarmait's brother, Donnchad the Fat, would end up getting butchered in the battle and killed. Diarmait was taught a humbling lesson that day, losing his brother and being defeated in battle. Diarmait and the King of Osraige would spend that winter of 1041 plotting their revenge. The following year in 1042, that revenge would come when, in battle, they would kill the King of Leinster, butchering him in battle. And then very quickly, Diarmait mac Máel na Mór would race to go and capture the kingdom of Leinster, collecting all of the cattle tribute throughout all of Leinster, marking him King of Leinster. However, Diarmait didn't have the force to take on Donnchada, King of Ireland. So Diarmait and Donnchada came to an agreement where he would give up cattle tribute and hostages to Donnchada, King of Ireland, and in return Diarmait would recognise him as the rightful King of Ireland. And they did so. Diarmait had gotten up the pace from just a marauder wandering around the south of Leinster to now being King of Leinster. He'd grown a long way, but Diarmait wasn't finished yet. He still despised his overlord, King of Ireland, and he was eyeing up that title next. Now, just because Diarmait mac Máel na Mór submitted over to Donnchada O'Brien, the rightful King of Ireland, doesn't mean that Diarmait wasn't still active. In fact, he was. He still was playing the Game of Thrones. He was trying to play to win. And around 1048, Diarmait had got himself into a petty war, a private war between another member of the same kingdom under Munster, which was Dacia, close to Waterford. Both Dacia and Diarmait mac Máel na Mór were technically speaking under the power of Donnchada. However, this was normal for two noble families to fight each other, even if they had a king above them who was the same. This was called a private war between two families and was very normal throughout all of Europe. What would normally happen is that the two families would have a disagreement over a border, cattle, so on and so forth, and they would have a private war between the two noble families. And just like any other situation, eventually the king would come in and settle the matter himself, which is the same here as well. Also, Diarmait is very active up in the north of Ireland as well, just north of them. He's very active in Meath when he makes an alliance with the Ullid, and the Ullid up in the north ally themselves with Diarmait mac Máel na Mór, and they both agree to attack Meath, and they do so in around 1048 as well. Donnchada mac Máel na Mór goes in and raids Meath for cattle and brings him back to his settlement in Leinster. Diarmait would also start to branch out internationally as well when the sons of Godwinson, the future King of England, would come to visit him one day. Godwinson and Edward the Confessor being the King of England at the time, had a falling out, and so the Godwinsons' children came to Diarmait looking for more troops to support them, and so they did. Diarmait had given them food, support and supplies, men, so on and so forth that they needed for their campaign in England. They went back to England and were very successful. Because of this, Diarmait suddenly got an overwhelming demand for more Irish supplies back in England. The trade between his area of Leinster and Bristol would suddenly increase, and Diarmait needed to fill that supply, that demand from England, and Diarmait knew exactly where to go. Diarmait needed to capture Dublin. Dublin was one of the biggest trading ports in Western Europe, and Diarmait badly needed to capture it to fill the demands of England. So Diarmait spent that winter plotting and planning to take Dublin, and that summer of 1052, Diarmait actually sent a small raiding party to the outskirts of Dublin. He never actually planned to take Dublin, just mostly raided them into submission. However, one raid escalated completely out of control. When it started off as a small skirmish, the king of Dublin freaked out and ran out of Dublin, expecting a larger army to come. Diarmait found out about this very quickly and got his small raiding party and whatever men he could muster up and quickly took the walls of Dublin as quick as he could. Diarmait managed to capture Dublin perfectly fine and subdued that army and made it a part of his. However, this victory was short-lived, because Donnchad, King of Ireland, was quick to get over there in 1053 that following summer and forced Diarmait back into submission again, showing to him who was the true King of Ireland the whole time. However, Diarmait had full control of Dublin now and was quickly becoming one of the wealthiest nobles in Europe. Diarmait was also involved with multiple noble battles, private wars in England as well between various nobles. This was all really profitable for Diarmait, as most nobles would pay him for a large amount of fleets, supplies, so on and so forth. Diarmait was quickly becoming very wealthy. Diarmait decided so in 1054 to declare war on Donnchad, the King of Ireland. He was going to take that crown for himself. He was the wealthiest man in Ireland at the time, and he would attack various spots in Ireland. Donnchad also decided to ally himself with the King of Norway. Himself and the prince at the time, Magnus, would go into the west of England and attack various places in England. This would also boost her up, Diarmait as well, with a really strong ally in Norway and his strong allies in Ireland as well. Diarmait became exceptionally powerful very quickly. Diarmait would continue to expand his large, growing trade empire. He would go over to the Isle of Man, close to Dublin, and capture that for himself. This was led by his son Murtoch. Máel na Mór was making himself a fierce of reputation, not just abroad but back in Ireland as well. Turlough O'Brien, the family rival to Donnchad, was looking to capitalise from this. Turlough O'Brien, also known as Turlough O'Brien, happened to be the foster son of Diarmait Máel na Mór, and told him that he was also looking to remove Donnchad and take over as head of the clan. Diarmait would support this. Turlough O'Brien, would send his army, the O'Brien side of his army, over to join Diarmait. Complete treason within the family. However, Turlough didn't care because he was looking to take the kingship for himself, the kingship of Munster. Diarmait decided to fully capitalise on this, and using the money he had made overseas and the money he was making in Ireland, raised up a large army in 1062 and marched straight to Tipperary, heartland of the O'Briens at the time. There he had won a decisive and huge battle against Donnchad O'Brien, and now Diarmait would be proclaimed King of Ireland. The new King of Ireland in 1062, Diarmait Máel na Mór, would continue his international relationship as well, allying his friends and allies in Wales, the various princes in Wales, against Harold Godwinson. Harold Godwinson was marching into Wales, taking various territories and tributes. When princes were defeated in Wales, they would quickly sail over to Ireland for support. Oostmen, Irish Vikings, were very active in England, both trading Bristol, slaves, merchant goods, etc. But Oostmen were also popping up here, there and everywhere in England, raiding randomly anywhere that had a river. Those goods and people who were kidnapped were quickly taken to Dublin, enslaved, and goods sold throughout the world. In 1066, Diarmait would continue his expansion in Ireland. He would go into Connacht and very quickly take over the province. All that was left now was the north and Meath. The middle of Ireland, was getting quickly surrounded. In the east side, Diarmait had control of Dublin. On the south side, Diarmait had control of Munster. And on the west side, Diarmait had control of Connacht. The only thing Diarmait now didn't control was Meath in the centre of all of this, and the north. Diarmait MacMail na Mór's attention once again would be back in England. After 1066, the Saxons, the Godwinsons, would lose the Battle of Hastings against King William the Conqueror, the Normans, who would eventually come in and invade Ireland. Straight away, the Godwinsons would go over to Ireland looking for assistance of the King of Ireland, Diarmait of course, in Dublin. There, Diarmait would give them the troops that they needed and returned back with two major raids. The first one was in 1068, which was a massive success against the Normans. The second, again, would be in 1069. This one wouldn't work so well. Diarmait had allied himself with the King of Denmark, Sweyn II, and together they would march on York and capture it. However, the King of England, William the Conqueror, would pay off Sweyn's noble. He would go into exile in Scotland, of course. He couldn't go back to Denmark. Sweyn would again do a second campaign. However, there would be problems in Ireland, and Diarmait wasn't going to be able to do another campaign again in England. You see, in 1070, Diarmait's children would die during a plague. Leinster would seize the opportunity and rebel. His rival clans in Leinster were too much for Diarmait, and he had to call for assistance of his foster son, Turlough O'Brien. Turlough O'Brien would march to Leinster in 1070, and from 1070 to 1071 would have a campaign to ease unrest in Leinster. Turlough was successful, and for the most part hadn't usurped Diarmait and had stayed quite loyal to him. This would change in time, of course, but not until after his death. Diarmait, once control had come back to Leinster in 1072, would march up to Meath to try to finish off his conquest of Ireland. However, Diarmait was defeated in the Battle of Oba, fought on the 7th of February 1072, where Diarmait would end up being defeated and executed on the battlefield. Turlough would seize the opportunity himself, go into Leinster, take out any rival he could, and was crowned King of Ireland after him. He would give himself the title King of Greater Ireland. Hey guys, thanks very much for all the support. Of course, it's so difficult to shove in all the details into Diarmait MacMail na Mór's life, and of course I would appreciate anyone to leave a few comments about any fun facts they know about Diarmait. He lived a really interesting life, and it's quite interesting because around 1066 a lot of historians and a lot of people on YouTube will quickly dismiss Ireland. It's why I found doing this project such a pleasure, because I find it anytime that somebody would bring up Ireland in 1066, they will quite literally turn around and say Ireland is a place full of 150 petty kings who run around naked fighting one another. They wouldn't be a part of the Norman invasion of England at all. And so a lot of people forget about this, even in the main textbooks to do with the Norman invasion of England. Ireland isn't even mentioned, and yet Ireland is one of the major players as part of it. So too is Denmark. Denmark is massively forgotten. A lot of people assume that 1066 is just the Battle of Hastings and that's that, when in fact there's a lot more history going on. Finally, also guys, thanks for all the support. Obviously I'll leave the link to all the merchandise below. Also, we have the Instagram as usual. We also have Facebook with Clans and Dynasties. And finally, we also have a Twitter up and going. We got the Twitter up and going this week, so make sure to go and follow us. We haven't got too many followers right now, but we're constantly updating and posting up our latest and new videos, so definitely give us a follow there. As always guys, thanks very much for all the support. Every single comment means so much to me, and I'll try to reply to you guys ASAP, unless I'm asleep. But other than that guys, thanks very much and all the best.